you know, the real trick is you have to make people money. And if you can make people money, they're going to roll the dice with you again. You know, people kept investing in me. And so I've got people now that are invested in, that have invested with me for 35 years.
Hello, welcome to the Assay TV. My name is Brett Stevenson. I'm joined today by Ross Beaty, Chair of Pan American Silver and Equinox Gold. Ross, good to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Ross, a lot of people already likely know who you are, and you know, we're working in this kind of work from home situation, so it's good to have you in from Vancouver and then here in Hong Kong. You know, I just wanted to ask you, in terms of your career, what drifted you towards mining, and what was some of the drivers there?
Well, I'm a guy, I've always wanted to be outside. I love hiking and camping, and I've always loved it. So I wanted a job that took me outside, and it was a natural fit to go into geology. And UBC, the University of British Columbia, where I went, has a very good geology school. There's a lot of activity in Vancouver in mineral exploration companies, and so it was a natural fit for me to go out and take what you called economic geology, which means looking for mines. I loved climbing mountains and getting paid to camp and paid to fly around in helicopters. It was a wonderful job, and then I discovered I was sort of more of an entrepreneur. I wasn't such a good employee. I liked being a self-starter and looking for things myself. So I started my own little company right out of university. And Vancouver in the 80s had a thing called the Vancouver Stock Exchange, which is kind of a Wild West stock exchange, and it was very cheap and very easy to start public companies. So some guys, I hooked up with some other guys, and we formed a little public company, which is my first public company in 1985 of all things, called Equinox Resources. And now, sort of 15 companies later, here we are today, and I've got my latest company, which I started just a couple of years ago. It's called Equinox Gold, and I have to say it's probably going to be my last company after I think a string of 15 or 16 companies.
Well, there's just something about you know, starting your career and ending it off, I guess, with kind of the same way in some way. And I guess, like, what kind of like brought you to, like, you're at a university as a geologist, like, I'm going to start a company. Like, where does that come from?
Probably came from my dad. He was an entrepreneur in the lumber business, and unfortunately he died when I was young, but I kind of probably have his genes. But you know, I'm a fairly impatient kind of person. I'm not a terribly good kind of team player per se, and I just wanted to kind of get out and make my way in the world, and I did that really from the get-go. I've actually never worked for another company ever, other than during the 70s when I was a student.
Okay.
Student geologist.
All right, and then, you know, you're saying you're actually a good kind of business person, entrepreneur. Over the course of your career, like, what would you say is your top, like, you know, remarkable investments that you have made when you became more of an investor?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I've never really been an investor per se, Brett. I've been more of a developer. So I've had my own companies, and I've always made the most money, you know, with my own companies.
Yeah.
Really, my first company, and then it was Equinox in '85. I sold it in '94. I started two companies then. One was a silver company, started from scratch, and it's now the world's preeminent silver mining company. That's Pan American Silver. And I started a junior exploration company in Bolivia that I sold, then another one in Brazil that I sold, and then we had a string of 6 copper companies. We sold all of those. Those were the exploration companies where you add value and find a big company that wants to buy it from you, versus the operating business like Equinox Resources, my first company, Pan American Silver, my silver company, Equinox Gold now. And then I had a renewable energy company for 10 years. It's sort of in the middle, which I also merged with another company, and it's still around. And it's quite a big company. So most of my activities in my career have been, you know, starting something from scratch, building it into something big, and either keeping it as an operating business or selling it as an exploration company. I mean, I did invest in the period sort of. I had a string of 6 copper companies from about 2002 to 2014. When I sold the last one of those, I sort of said, okay, now I'm going to invest in, and actually even after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, I had a fair bit of cash, so I was able to invest in other companies. And, you know, I did fairly well as an investor, but it wasn't as satisfying. It's just, for me, what I love doing is building things, building companies, putting teams together, uh, adding value, growing, exploring, developing. You know, that's the stuff that I do really well. And when you invest, you're basically investing in someone else's dream. And you know, you basically just write a check, give them some money, or buy a stock in the open market, and let them run it. And you don't have that kind of identity of sort of helping build something. And you can sell at any moment. Whereas when you're locked into a company, when you start it, and you bring other investors in as shareholders and co-investors with you, it's a very different thing. I generally only sell once. I only sell when someone else takes everything out, all the other shareholders out, or everybody out, I should say. So it's quite a different sort of thought process when you're inside a company developing it than just being an investor.
Right. And but it sounds a bit like you mostly went into precious metals, but what took you to copper? I'm curious.
Well, I've had all kinds of metals in my career. I've been involved in uranium and nickel and copper and rare earth elements, all sorts of stuff. I mean, that's just the life of a geologist, I'd say. But gold is the easiest to build a company around from scratch. There's gold in all kinds of geological environments all over the world. There's lots and lots of little deposits. Small companies can develop them, and some of them turn out to be big deposits. Silver is much more difficult. It took us a long time to build a silver company that was focused on silver. But when we've built it, it's now the world's preeminent silver company, which was our focus from the start. So I like gold and silver, but I also like copper. And from time to time, I've liked uranium, and from time to time, you know, there's other metals that are good. Nickel was good for a period of time, then it wasn't. Zinc was good for a while, then it wasn't. Now it's sort of in the middle. So I've had quite a number of commodities in my career, but principally gold and silver.
Okay. And going back to those kind of in that same theme of, building companies or making kind of your own investments in your companies, like what was some of the, in your career, the like kind of the, things that you wish had maybe gotten better, so to speak?
Oh boy, I've made more mistakes than anybody. I mean, you know, you can't help make mistakes when you're doing I mean, life's a one-way street, and when you're an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
and you know, no training, no mentor, you just kind of go, and it's the school of hard knocks, really. You make all sorts of mistakes, and I've made lots. I mean, I've made mistakes with scale. One of the things that's really important is looking for something big and focusing on size, because size, if you have something big, it takes care of a lot of problems. If you have a commodity or a project that is so big that it's going to make people billions instead of millions, even if you get it wrong, you're still going to, you know, it's still going to be something that's going to command an opportunity to give people, you know, 10 times their money instead of 10 or 20%. And this business is not about 10 and 20%. It's far too risky. You want to offer investors multiples of their investment in order to attract capital. And if you focus on little returns, you're just not going to give them that. So I made some mistakes in the early years. Another thing is people. I've been very, very lucky in my career. I've had some outstanding partners and people that have helped me build my companies. I certainly didn't do it by myself. All of these things have taken a huge number of people. But you know, from time to time, I've got somebody in my company who's a senior member who's it was just not a fit, just not a good fit with my personality. And I've fought that, and I've kept thinking, well, they're going to change it, it's going to get better. But if I had advice for anyone, or if I was to do it again, I'd say, you know, as soon as you realize that there's not a good chemistry between people, shop, move on, and find a better person, because it's just painful having to deal with that. You know, you can't be too choosy where you work. I've worked in all kinds of crazy places. I've worked all over the world, really. Most of it's been successful, but I spent 3 years of my life in Russia, right in the mid 90s. I had a wonderful, huge silver project there. Eventually, we got attacked by a corrupt Russian company, and they stole the project from us. And I wasted 3 years of my life, and we spent about $40 million on the project. We got our money back, but we wasted all that time. You know, I'd probably do it again, though. I have to say, I'd probably do it again. The reward was worth the risk. You know, I knew all the time we could get blown up. We did, but we might not have. There's been 1 or 2 cases of companies that have actually done okay in Russia. Very few. I certainly wouldn't go there now at this stage of my career. But I was younger and I would go anywhere. I mean, I just embraced risk. When you have high risk, very often you have high reward potential, and that's where things kind of balance. And and so I would say, don't run away from location, don't run away from stage of project. Uh, Tough projects are not very good things to get into. Some mining projects are very, very difficult. The gold or the silver or whatever the metal is hard to recover. It's complex. Simple is good, complicated is bad, cheap is good, expensive is bad. Those are all kind of lessons you learn. But it's kind of hard to put it in a box in terms of what you really want, because nature has such a variability to it. Every project is different. Every country is different. You can't be too clever. You just have to hold your nose sometimes, plow on, drill holes, develop mines, bring teams together, not be too fussy.
Excellent. Yeah.
Easy to say and very hard to do.
that goes with just a lot of things.
It does.
I'm curious, also just building up on that point, you might have answered my next question. What would you say was, when you're building your companies, maybe you can kind of re-emphasize it, when you're building your companies, what was the most important criteria that allowed you to succeed in those cases? I think you've already mentioned, like, people obviously being one.
Yeah. Well, very often, success begets success, in the sense that, this is a high risk business, so it's suitable for public companies, where investors can give you money and then they can sell anytime if they want to. They can exit. It's not so good in private companies where capital's very it's locked in. So when you take people's money, generally speaking, I've tried to treat it like my own, and I've tried to be very thrifty and very, very frugal, truly treat it like my own. And so investors really like that. But the real trick is you have to make people money, and if you can make people money, they're going to roll the dice with you again. And so I was very lucky in my first company. I made a success of it. We found a gold mine. We explored probably 50 properties all over the world. Finally found a gold mine in Nevada, and the stock was bought by a big U.S. company, and everybody did well because the last trade was at an all-time high. And then I started a new company almost the next day, and my investors, they went out of one and they went right into my new one. So I had that good fortune of having a share price that went up quite a bit long before we backfilled it with assets, and it allowed me to sell to raise money without too much dilution. So if you dilute too much at the get-go, your capital structure is blown up, and it's really hard to go and build something from there. So I was lucky in that I was able to sell without too much dilution, protect my own investment, and kind of see what I could do with the money. And as it turned out, we did well with the money, and we built a fairly good sized company, sold a couple other ones along the way, and people kept investing in me. And so I've got people now that have invested with me for 35 years. They've started with my first company, and they've invested and made money with almost all the companies I've started. So it's been very gratifying in that sense. And that's part of a success, I'd say, is having loyal shareholders.
Right. And so I guess to kind of encapsulate that, like, a lot of it would be people. You've had good people with you along the way.
For sure. Oh my goodness. Like I said earlier, you can't do it by yourself. And I've been very blessed with terrific players. I also have terrific partners of mine and employees, and I consider them all kind of partners, because you can't do these things yourself. I have a management style that's very decentralized. I give a lot of responsibility. I try to do my job well, and I don't try to engineer a mine. I mean, I'm not an engineer, and I don't try to count money. I'm not an accountant, and I'm not good at those things. I'm not particularly good at people, actually. So I've got guys who are good at people, who are running the human side of the business. So that's important. And again, it's not just skill, it's a lot of it's luck. And I've been lucky in getting some really great people over the years in different companies. But it's also trying to create an atmosphere in a company of a real family, of a real team that works together well, that has fun together. And if you have fun, to me, I think you actually have more success if you can build a team environment where you're all having fun. You all know where you're going. You have a simple focus. and you can get there more easily.
I agree on the fun part. From Equinox to Equinox, if I can say that,
Yep.
from your first company to your last company, what are some of the observations that you have made about how the industry's changed?
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of hard to put a pin in it in simple language, but I would say for sure the business of public companies has definitely changed in two ways. The first is it's much more expensive to get into the game. So I started my first company in 1985. I invested literally $3,250, and with that, I got a bought a block of stock that was enough to kind of get me motivated to build the company. Uh, we raised $145,000 in our IPO, literally 145,000, of which we netted 110,000. Well, you could never do that today. Our fees were $15,000, right? Legal fees were 15, another 15 for accounting, and today you can't start a company unless you put about $1 million into legal and accounting and all the BS you've got to do to follow the rules and regulations that are out there today. So it's a lot more difficult, a lot more complicated, and all this stuff about securities regulation and investor protections, it really does cost money. So it's harder to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is the nature of investors is different. There are so many more, I would call them dumb investors in the sense that they're robot investors or they're ETFs. They're people, they're the algorithmic traders that just don't really care about what the value proposition is. And so exploration companies for them per se, they can't figure them out. And they generally don't buy them. So there's way fewer buyers today for small companies than there were 10, 20, 30 years ago. And that makes it much more difficult for small companies. By the same token, if you get a company with scale, the way we've been trying to get with Equinox Gold now, it's 2 years out of the gate, but we're now trading $30 million of stock every day because we've actually focused on growing really, really quickly so we can attract ourselves to those big investor pools that have so much money today that simply don't invest in the small companies. So I wanted to grow just like crazy. We did it through M&A, and we're there now. Hard to do. It's hard for a lot of guys to do it, and so it's a much more, I would say, it's a more difficult field today. And then, of course, in the operational side, there's lots and lots of differences. Where you go and find mines, how you find them, how much money you have to raise to de-risk projects. It's not so easy. It's much more suited to professional management than it used to be. It used to be, oh my goodness, there were all kinds of crazy people out there who were great promoters but didn't have a clue about the business, and all they tended to be were paper hangers. They just sold stock, and usually people were buying their own stock that they were selling. I mean, it was a real Wild West in the early days. Got a terrible reputation, but today it's a much more professional business. More capital is needed, but the right management team is going to track that.
And what's stayed the same?
Well, the bottom line of the business is it's like a casino. I mean, the exploration business looking for minerals, it's very, very risky. It's risky. I mean, it's risky in exploration. It's risky in mine development, in actual mining, in the social regime today. That's another thing, by the way, that's changed. It takes probably 15 or 20 years now to build a mine from when you first discover it to actual operation, because there's so much more social license you need, environmental protection, community management. Governments are slower to permit things. There's just so many more impediments to actually getting things going now than there used to be, and so that all builds into taking a longer time, more risk along the way. You can have a project blow up at any time, and so it's pretty much, I mean, it's a business that unlike oil and gas exploration or biotech, it's something you need to offer investors big returns to get them to put their money in to take the big risk, because they can go to zero very quickly. There's only 1 out of 100 or 1 out of a few hundred of these exploration companies that ever become producers.
And I guess, talking about new entrants, I guess, if you were giving advice to young geologists and young investors that want to get involved, what is kind of the parting wisdom you would give?
Well, the first thing is I'd say look at yourself in the mirror and find out if you're really suited to be an entrepreneur. If you want to get out there and start your own company and build your own teams and go out and bang rocks and look for gold, that's great. There's a need for that, and there will always be a need for that. But if you're more of a team member where you're a good, you're a part of the team like that, where you're going to be not so suited to telling the stories, doing the promotion, maybe raising the money, but you're more suited to doing the work and being part of a company where someone else is doing that promotion, you're probably not going to be very successful if you try to be an entrepreneur and start it up yourself. So look at yourself in the mirror, I would say, and try to figure out where you're good at and then focus on doing that. Otherwise, you're likely to be quite frustrated and your company won't be too successful. Um, Beyond that, there's no real formula that well, the formula to me is hard work, tremendous determination, motivation, not getting frustrated, is not being afraid to lose everything. You just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, keep going. This is a business that, like I said, is highly risky, and you know make sure you have investors who understand the risks. And if you do lose them all their money, if you've done the right thing and if you've done what you told them you were going to do, a lot of investors are very, very forgiving, and they'll give you more money again if you spend it on what you say you're going to do. If you take a dollar and spend it on something other than what you said you're going to spend it on, you'll never get it again. So stay focused, be honest, be transparent, work hard, don't wait for the phone to ring, pick it up, make the phone calls. That's where I think the good entrepreneurs, the successful people, and I could name a half a dozen who are just people I admire so much, who are just sort of serially successful. I've been serially successful. I've never really figured out why more people can't be like that, but it is that's the way of the world.
Yeah.
Lucas Lundin, Robert Friedland, Richard Bork, those kind of guys, they just constantly succeed with almost whatever they're working on, and it's they just have the secret formula.
The touch of the golden hand. And and just talking about gold and silver, you know, obviously you're quite interested in gold and silver, but what are your comments about where gold and silver are at today? And if you had maybe another 20 years in mining, would you jump into something else at this point in time?
Right now, the market for gold and silver is the most bullish that I've seen in my entire career. I've had many cycles. Maybe the period sort of 1978 to 1980 was equally bullish. Gold price went from $100 to $700, but I mean, right now it's just a perfect storm for gold, and COVID is playing right into that, and all the easing that's happening, and the money printing that's going on with banks all over the world and central banks all over the world. So, I mean, the fundamentals are fabulous for gold and silver. That's why I like it right now. That's the game I'm in. But this is a cyclical world. At some point, the cycle will end. Gold will go up to a point that's toppy, and it'll bounce around a little bit. Then it'll crater, and the tide will go out for 4 or 5 years. That's how these cycles work. And by that time, I'll probably be out of the business. Maybe not. But certainly right now it's fun. But to every metal is different. Copper is different than gold, and so right now I think the market's really good for gold and silver. It's probably okay for copper, but it's not so good for coal, or for zinc, or for lead, or for nickel, or for those kind of metals. And so you have to really pick your metal. When there's a synchronized bull market like we saw in the 2000s because of the Chinese expansion, every metal was good. Oil went to $140 a barrel. Every metal was good. Coal was good. You name it. But now it's a much more picky market. This COVID crisis and the world economic picture is very confused. I'd say nobody really knows what's going to happen after the COVID crisis is over. Is it going to be stagflation? Is it going to be deflation? Is it going to be inflation? Is it going to be growth? Is it no growth? I mean, there's just so many opinions from every economist. So I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just know it's really good for gold right now. And as long as that's the case, I've got two principal companies and a couple of other juniors. That's where I'm focusing my time, and so far so good.
Perfect, and good. That's good advice on kind of sticking to gold and silver. And I'm just also curious about how do you view Canadian mining in 2020, like the state of the industry, so to speak, and how do you think Canadian companies are faring?
Well, Canadian mining in Canada is a core strength. I mean, it's one of the things we do well. We always have. It's a resource country. We have great universities that produce great geologists. Great geologists build great companies, make great discoveries. What is different? What is now different and has evolved over the years is that Canada is more of a it's almost like an amoeba where money comes into Canada from all over the world, principally through the Toronto Stock Exchange, into these public companies, of which there's a legion of Canadian junior exploration and larger mining companies that big producers. Money comes in from all over the world, from Hong Kong and from Singapore and Australia. I mean, everywhere, South America, and certainly Europe and North America. And then it gets spent all over the world. So Canadian companies used to be mainly in Canada, to some degree in the US, but now they're absolutely everywhere. I mean, most of the mines in Mexico are owned by Canadian companies, Chile, Peru, Argentina, same thing. All over Africa, Canadian companies are just everywhere. So it's a business that we're good at. We have you could say an ecosystem which supports these public companies in Canada. We have good mining accountants, good mining lawyers. Securities regulation favors the business. It makes it quite easy to raise capital here. We have a lot of analysts, a lot of investors who understand the game, a lot of institutional investors who understand it. And so there's a lot of capital that goes into it in Canada. It's much different in the US. The US is not a mining center. There's very few public companies that are listed in the US as principal listings. It's more difficult there. Regulations are more difficult. It's a great place if you're going to build a tech company, but it's not such a great place if you're a mining company. So Canada has so does Australia. Those are really the main markets for mining, smaller companies anyway. And big companies, big companies kind of evolved to where the capital is. The big companies would always kind of dual list Canada, US, or Canada, London, or London, US, or Australia. But it's a core business of Canada, and the companies in Canada are good at it, and generally speaking, they're pretty successful.
And just even on Australia and Canada, like what's it going to take like for Canadian mining companies to continue to compete with kind of Australian companies over the next 10, 20 years?
Well, we can't really compete with Australian companies in Australia. They can't compete very well in Canada. We have pretty good knowledge of our own backyard. I mean, some do. There's some Canadian companies that have done very well in Australia, and vice versa. But Canada's strength is really Latin America, North America, parts of Africa. I mean, Canadian companies go everywhere. They go to China, Russia, you name it. And so do Australian companies. Australia is a much smaller capital market, though. It's a lot farther away, but there's a lot of good companies in Australia, from Sydney, from Perth, from Melbourne. Great mining people from Australia, great engineers, great geologists. I mean, it's a real mining friendly country too.
All right. And just from the last question for you, Ross, if what like the Equinox is your last kind of company you've stated, where ostensibly you would retire. I'm curious what what are your future plans? Perhaps, I mean, you can't really take mining out of someone like yourself. You've been in it a long time. What would you if you leave Equinox, would you kind of still be around? Well, I guess I'm just curious what your future plans are.
Brett, I would say I don't really have them. I have a lot of stuff I want to do right now, particularly with Equinox. Pan American itself is a big company now. It's I don't know, it's an $8 or $9 billion company and 12,000 employees and 12 mines. So it's kind of running itself. I've got a couple of juniors in Ecuador. I'd like to see those things bought by somebody eventually, and I've got a few other little deals. I'd like to see those to conclusion. And Equinox Gold, I want to see it to become a really big, sustainable mining company, and that's really what I've got my head focused on right now. We're already almost there. We're Equinox Gold has 6 mines, 6,000 employees, and it's got about a $3 billion market cap now. So it's done pretty well in 2 years, but we're not quite there. So I've got to get there. Once it's time to go, then I'll go, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I actually have some thoughts, but the first thing I've got to do is get to that point and basically say that I've achieved what I set out to achieve with Equinox. I'm not quite there yet.
Okay, well we look forward to seeing what you achieve with Equinox and Pan American Solar over the next couple of years. And Ross, just want to say thank you so much for coming on to the Assay TV.
My pleasure, but thank you for the invitation.
Well, thanks.